Welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm your host, André Hedlund, educational psychologist, author, geek, and nerd. This show brings you science and learning through conversations with stellar people from different fields. Put on your spacesuits and hold tight. Our voyage into the learner's universe begins now. Welcome to another episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm very honored to have Sarah Oberle as my guest today. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for coming.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. I've actually followed your work on LinkedIn, especially, and that's how I actually connected with you a couple of months ago. I think maybe last year, right? And then I invited you to.
I think last year, yeah.
It was last year, right? And then we invited you to deliver a talk for us, for the Mind, Brain, and Education SIG about, well, whatever it is that you do. We'll get into that in a moment. But it was really special because it was on International Women's Day, and we were trying to encourage more girls to get into science, right? So I wanted to ask you, the very first question is this: why are you into science, Sarah? What got you into science?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on that, and congratulations on all of your recent success as well. I've been following you as well. So,
Thank you.
What got me into science is I just have an incessant curiosity, I think, and I always have. I think it's just an innate quality of mine. So anytime I can learn how something works or why something happens, I am all ears. So I think I've always been more of a math and science type person,
Yeah.
But science in particular. And I always have said if I taught secondary, it would be a science.
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just been something I've always loved.
So I guess you could call yourself a nerd like me. I think you were.
Oh, for sure. And I say that proudly. That wasn't always the case, but I definitely am proud of that. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. I think there was a lot of stigma around this word. I don't know, maybe decades ago, when people were,
Yeah.
and then people started realizing that nerds actually have something to offer because of our innate curiosity and I think this pull towards scientific endeavors. So I'm very proud to call myself a nerd, and we will talk about that later on. But
Okay.
now I want to ask you, why do you think science is important, Sarah? And let me give you some context. I don't know. I know in the US it's actually quite similar to what's happening in Brazil, but a lot of people from different areas, different fields, different positions, they're attacking science. They're telling us that science cannot help us, that we should be careful, we shouldn't trust scientists. But why is science an important endeavor?
For me, I feel like, science is what we should be leaning into when we're looking for improvements in any aspect of our world. In my context, in particular, that would be teaching. So, understanding more about learning, and then how can we refine our practice based on what we know about learning. But yeah, it's sad to see that is what's going on right now. But I think science has so much to offer, and I hate for it to be associated with ulterior motives or anything like that. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but I think that's how we get better, and that's how we understand more about our world and everyone that's in it is we lean into science.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, and I think people want to know. I think they want people to say that they want to hear that science is not perfect, that scientists are not perfect, that human beings they make mistakes. Some people are unethical, and they push for whatever agenda is I don't know, sponsoring them maybe. And I think, but still, science is a tool to help human beings make progress and check, not just according to what they have come to find themselves, but there's peer revision. There are some very interesting mechanisms, let's say, put into place to actually guarantee that science is a very good tool. It's something that we can trust. We should trust more, right?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And I think, science takes a bad name for on behalf of some of the behaviors of people.
Yeah.
So we, can come in and our egos or the outcome that we are really hoping for, maybe isn't exactly what the science says, and so we perhaps skew things. But I think if you strip all of that away, if we just look at what our results are, that like you said, it's an incredible tool for progress and improvement.
Perfect. Now let's talk about your science. So you are a learning scientist. Is that a fair description of what you do?
I accept that gladly. Yes.
Okay. So a learning scientist, actually, most of my guests so far have been learning scientists. And there's a reason. I think I want people to know more about the science of learning, about neuroscience, cognitive sciences. And let's start with what is learning then? And then we can talk more specifically about the work you do. So how would you define learning, Sarah?
I think learning is understanding something new, gaining knowledge, and knowledge that eventually can be assimilated and used for understanding concepts bigger than just the individual blocks of knowledge. So, and I think that, I've heard the definition, a change in long-term memory.
Okay. Yeah.
So I agree with that. I think the goal is to be able to use that permanent storage, that information that we're permanently storing, to think critically about the world. But I think on a very basic level, yes, I would agree that it's a change in our long-term memory.
Yeah. And you study specifically working memory more often than long-term memory, I suppose, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, excellent. Well, so let's, before you tell us a little bit more about working memory or your research, why did you get into the science of learning? I mean, I asked you about science, but now in particular, what about the science of learning?
So I've been a teacher for a long time. So obviously I've seen the good and the bad in education. And, I think that we can be a very siloed field in the sense that when we're trying to problem solve, we don't look outside of the concepts that we hold dear, and a lot of it is dogma. So instead of looking to, well, what is the business industry doing, or what is, what are the sciences doing, which I think is such a missed opportunity. So, I initially was studying educational neuroscience. And then when I found out about science of learning, which is much more in the cognitive science, cognitive psychology sector, I thought, gosh, this is so immediately relevant to what I do every day. And I never learned about this. And it just felt so obvious to me. Like things like attention and memory are critical to learning, but we aren't taught as practitioners anything about that. We say
So
pay
true.
attention all day long, but we don't really know what that means and what that requires on the part of our students, and even on, for us as adults. So, when I kind of accidentally stumbled upon science of learning, which encompasses, I should say, those types of aspects of learning, I thought, I have to understand this and I have to share it somehow with other educators.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, I was talking to my other guests on this show about a feeling or a concern that is quite present nowadays. It's coming from teachers all over the world, which is the feeling that maybe science is trying to dictate what we do in the classroom because, science is about facts. That's what they say. And if attention works this way, if working memory works this way, then we have to follow a prescription or we have to follow a formula. And that ties our hands as teachers, as creative human beings. What do you think about that? Because I actually think it empowers us to choose based on those principles that we've been, investigating, let's say, I think it really gives us more insight into what we could do to potentially help our students learn best. But some people think we're tying their hands. So what do you have to say about that?
I would say that's a misconception, because I think that science of learning in particular is trying to sort of professionalize teachers' decision making. It is not telling you what to do. We know that teaching it has to be the most contextually dynamic work that there is. I mean, no two classrooms or students are alike, and then you put a combination of them together, and we could never say always do this, because you really have to. It all depends on so many factors, but what I think is that the information we can gain from learning about the things that are ubiquitous across students, across content, across age groups, is things that occur in all of us. We all have to pay attention somehow to learn. Information has to be held in our working memory. We have to be processing it. It has to be stored and retrieved. And just knowing that can improve the way that you problem solve in your classroom, the way that you structure your classroom, the way that you plan out your and pace your instruction. So I would say it is definitely not prescriptive at all. In fact, I think the intention of this science in particular is the opposite. It's really to say, we think you deserve to know this information. This is so relevant for your practice. This is going to make this is just going to make things make sense for you and allow you to make more informed decisions in your work.
That's it. Well said. And thank you for saying that, because I'm an advocate for, the science of learning. I want people to know more about it. And I think there are principles, universal principles of how we learn that we could understand better as teachers, as educators, even as parents, so that we can help, kids, teenagers, right? That's the whole point of this endeavor. And I think one of those principles is working memory. So please, Sarah, can you tell us what exactly is this thing called the working memory? People talk about it all the time, right? But we don't really understand how it works. And then I can ask you more questions. So based on the definition you will give us, what does that mean for teachers in the classroom? So what is the working memory system?
Yeah, so it is that the term is thrown around a lot in schools, particularly in the context of special education. And I think we all just assume, well, as the name implies, it's the part of your memory that's working. Really
the only one, right, that works.
There really is so much more to it, and it really is a critical aspect of learning. So working memory is a component of memory. It is, I like to say the difference between, you can think of working memory and short-term memory, the difference being short-term memory is like, remember this right now and hold it. And working memory is like, remember this and reorder it and calculate it and shuffle it around and, and also inhibit the things that are interfering your ability to maintain that information. So it is a very finite mental resource, a very precious one, but it's extremely limited. So the amount of information that you can hold at one time is small, and people will push for, well, how many, and I don't even know how you would identify bits of information. I mean, I think that would be up for debate, but it really it depends. It depends on a lot of things. So I always use the analogy when I'm explaining, like, what is anybody's working memory, both capacity and the duration through which you can maintain. And don't forget, you're not just maintaining it, you're also like sequencing or categorizing or comparing and contrasting. Like, it is truly working. I use, when I give a presentation, I use this box analogy where I say, well, if I asked you how many boxes can you hold, you would say, well, that depends. How big is the box? How heavy is the box? Have you
Yeah.
held boxes before? Are you feeling particularly tired right now? Like all these variables, which change throughout the day, throughout the weeks, throughout the moments, affect how efficient your working memory can be at any given time. So if I'm asking you
Yeah.
to remember something that you have no connection to, no prior knowledge, that's going to be really hard because you just don't have the context. If you're really tired and hungry and just physically not feeling great, that's going to compromise your
Yeah.
working memories capacity. If it just, there's so many things that go into your working memory's ability to function at its ideal capacity, that it's so hard to say, well, we can remember 5 to 7 items plus or minus two at any given
Yeah.
moment for 30 seconds, because there's just so much more that
That's so
affects.
true.
But work when we are engaging with ideas, when we're thinking about things, which is how we learn. Our working memory always has to be activated and always has to be maintaining that information, letting it swirl around. And I'll even tell my young students, you have to think about, I can't just lay this information upon you. You have to take it in and then you have to think about it. You have to
Yeah.
relate it to other ideas that you already know. So working memory, that, is it in a nutshell. But it is not really spoken about in
True.
terms of what it actually is and what it can look like when it's compromised. It is not talked about in the sense of what we can do knowing this to structure our learning environment, to pace our instruction, to help our students offload some of the demand on working memory. So, I felt like that was something that this is so relevant. This is so critical. I mean,
Absolutely.
I wouldn't say it's like the waiting area because that implies more of a passive function.
Yeah.
But for any new learning, it has to get through that. First you have to perceive
Yeah.
it, and then it has to be in your working memory. And even if it's not a learning as we would consider it in academics, even if it's just okay, I need to remember all of the things that I want to get from the grocery store, and then I'm going to plan my map around, okay, what's in this aisle, what's in
Yeah.
this aisle, and so any kind of thought juggling like that
Yeah.
is done through your working memory. And so if
Yeah.
your working memory isn't functioning well, it's going to have a tremendous impact on your ability to learn.
Yeah. The funny thing is that you mentioned is not exactly your waiting area or a
Right.
waiting area, but I think of it as the lobby of a hotel.
Lobby. That's a
That's
better
what yeah,
analogy. Yeah.
because
Because
when
it's
things
busy.
come in, then they have to do something. They have to go to the front desk and then get an ID card to go to the top floor, or they go sit at the bar and order a martini. So you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
something there, right? But
Right.
it's funny that also one of the things that came to my mind now is we talk about how many items or how many chunks you can hold in your working memory at a time. We talk about how many minutes it lasts, but according to what you said, we can't really tell. It depends on the type of things, the type of information. It depends on your mental state. It depends on, if you're having a good day or a bad day. Because I
Right. Right.
remember when I was studying psychology of education, we studied, the case of HM, Henry Molaison, and he had his hippocampi removed, and then he could not make new memories. And then people said, well, it's a 15-minute window or something like that, right? So after 15 minutes, you recycle, then you have to start all over again or something like that. So we can't really be very specific about those things, right, Sarah? It depends on
Right.
many variables, yeah?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the one cheat code, I'll call it, for working memory
Yeah.
is whatever information you know automatically is one less item, I'll say, that
Yeah.
your working memory has to juggle. So,
Okay.
for
Yeah.
example, if I am trying to solve a word problem and I am not automatic with my math facts, Now, in addition to understanding and figuring out what operation is appropriate for the word problem, well, now I also have to juggle, okay, well, what is 8 and 7? Okay, now I'm going to, and the chance that, you're going to get it wrong because now you have less, you're running on a much less efficient mode because you just have too much going on. Whereas if you've automatized math facts per se, you don't even have to think about that. You know right away, okay, 8 and 7, 15. So that job is completely off your working memory's radar. So anything that's automatic is like a complete relief. It's like, okay, I don't have to worry about that. So I think that's really important for understanding instruction and teaching too, is, are you giving your students, is the expectation just too much at one time? And that's where, scaffolding comes in and building solid foundation, background knowledge, all of that.
Perfect. And I wanted to ask you that exactly. You've started talking about instruction. And I think nowadays, a lot of teachers are looking for better ways to help their students understand what they have to do. A lot of teachers are talking about implicit and explicit teaching, whether I should be giving a lecture, lecturing my students and giving a lot of instruction, or if I should allow them to do something more like guided discovery. I give them a worksheet or something like that with instructions, and then they have to figure out. I think both could be quite detrimental to learning, depending on how much information your students have to deal with, right? So if you're giving too many instructions, they cannot hold all of that in their working memory. They don't know what to do, and then they don't learn. Now, if you're expecting them to get a worksheet and figure out how to do, and then they have a problem with the numbers and the words, then too much information again. So what can you tell us based on your work about instruction? How can we work with instruction in the classroom so that it's better, it's optimized, let's say, so that students can learn better?
Yeah. And isn't that always our goal? So I like to say that building automaticity of knowledge, of the required knowledge to be successful in an activity, is the greatest gift you can give your students. So the example I used about the math problem, you can imagine the relief of, I don't have to calculate 8 and 7, for example. I can just focus on what's happening in this word problem. Or asking your students to read and they aren't solid, particularly in my setting, on letter sounds. It's like, you can't skip over those critical skills. And so making sure that your students are prepared in that sense, it supports them overall, but in particular, we're talking about working memory. It really takes the demand off of their working memory. So if I want to see if my students can understand and complete a word problem, but they aren't automatic with math facts, what am I really assessing? If they don't do well on the word problem, I think, they don't understand word problems, but really they may have been fine with the word problem. They were just too overloaded with having to manage that and doing a computation that was too much. So now I don't even know if what I'm assessing is really what I'm assessing. I think in terms of instructional decisions or routines, automaticity of any of that means that it's one less thing your students have to think about. They just know where it goes, or they know what to do. One of the things that I like to an offloading strategy I like to do is have everything prepared before I teach the lesson. So if after the lesson there's going to be an activity, pass it out before. They don't understand what I'll say. They'll be asked questions. I'm like, no. And my students know at this point, like, you're not supposed to know. I don't know this. I'm like, you're not supposed to know it. We're going to talk about it, but I want you to have it before. I want you to write your name and date before. Now I understand for older grades, a lot of it is on a device. So I'm sure that there would be an adjacent, way to prepare ahead of time. I want as much ready as possible so that after the lesson, when my students are going back to do some sort of independent task, there's no I mean, there's always a chance that they're working, they start thinking about something else from home, or
Yeah.
I want to go to recess, and now all of a sudden their working memory is like fighting an uphill battle. But
Yeah.
I don't want them to be holding information about the content and trying to manage the procedure of getting ready to um, complete their task. So as soon as they get back to their seats, they are ready to go. They can start working. And sometimes I'll say, hey, number 14, that one, the directions are different. Go do that one first, because
Uh-huh.
you do
Yeah.
it first, then you can put it out of your mind. So even just making them aware of, like, you have to remember this, you have to hold it, and there are strategies that I can share with you to help you, but also that you can have in mind, so that oh, this one's different. Next time I do something like this, I'm going to do that one first to get it
Yeah.
out of the way, so I can free up more space in my mind for other things. Because, younger kids in particular it doesn't occur to them that they don't have to do everything in order.
Yeah.
If the activity lends itself, you can teach them those things. But, also routines. What do I do? Where do I look? If you have a student who's struggling with some of those foundations, have supports right there.
Yeah.
So in my context, that might look like letter formation. I have kids that are still, and I see them stop, and it's for multiple seconds. Like, how do I make a lowercase g? And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, whatever they were managing in their working memory about the task has faded. And
Yeah.
because they were preoccupied with something else that they really shouldn't have had to be.
Exactly.
And I would say, even, something like that, if they don't have automatic, have a reference right there. Don't have it on an alphabet across the room, because
Yeah.
now we're using even more bandwidth to orient our vision and then scan to find the right letter, have it right
Yeah.
at their seat. All these little tweaks that you can make to safeguard, and it will never be perfect, because
Yeah.
you can't get inside their minds and constantly support their inhibition, but as much as you can put in place in terms of preventative measures and support like that is critical. The other thing
Yeah.
I would say, and most teachers are very aware of this, is just limiting the amount of information or the amount of expectations that you're giving at any one time. So I'll say, here's how you do number one. Go do number one and stop. And stop, because that
Yeah.
is all, if it's a particularly complicated task, or it requires sort of a lot of considerations, I don't want them to go ahead. They want to go ahead.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why I say go do that one and stop, because I don't think that you're going to be able to carry and remember the directions for one and the directions for two,
Exactly.
and complete, use and juggle the content knowledge that you need to complete the tasks as well. So that was a very long-winded response, but I wanted to
But it
I
was
wanted
great.
to cover to cover as much as I could. Yeah.
But what I'm getting from what you just explained is you're scaffolding a lot. You're really
Mhm.
helping. So first you do this, then you stop, then you can start doing this, and you started talking a little bit about the environment as well. So let's say, and this happens a lot. I think students struggle with maybe something that is quite minor, something that slipped our attention. We couldn't think of, and then they're struggling with that. And then you gave instructions, and then of course, because they were so focused on trying to get that right, they couldn't listen to you, or they did, but then they forgot. And then, so how does the environment influence here? Because, well, to give you more context, I know that a lot of classrooms in the US are decorated with posters and atlases, and there's so much going on in any given environment, educational environment in the US, that I feel like, okay, this is too much for students. It's the same here in Brazil. So you have the alphabet hanging from the wall, and you
Yeah.
have numbers. So what do you have to say about that, Sarah?
I am a primary teacher. I was guilty for years and years and years of
Yeah,
I wanted my room to just look nice. And
yeah,
that was for me. And that was for parents that would come in and say, "Oh,"
yeah,
but what I didn't realize, I was actually doing was compromising my students' ability to
Yeah.
attend. And attention is very closely connected to working memory, because when you are managing information in your working memory, you're using your attention to keep it there, and you are actively inhibiting your attention from picking up on other or perceiving other stimuli, whether it be external or internal. You're constantly fighting off these other things that your attention wants to be drawn to. So knowing that, speaking about classroom stuff or decor, I think unnecessary is just like, why? I mean, I think we just need to think about why am I putting, 10 posters up? Are they references? Are they references that my students need right now? Because if they're not, if they're going to be, for the science unit that we're doing in 2 months, then it just becomes extraneous, like visual noise. The decorative stuff, like, we don't want to have a stark, sad room, but put it in the back. The fact is, like, if you're driving down a road that you've driven down 100 times, there's so many things coming into your visual field, but your consciousness isn't being alert, or your attention isn't being alerted to them, because nothing is novel. Nothing, your attentional system isn't saying you need to pay attention to this. But the minute there's a new billboard or a new store or something off, your visual field goes right to it, because and that's a bottom up reflexive process. You can't not look. So if you are constantly changing things in your classroom, your kids cannot help themselves but to be looking at it. And so, we have to be aware of that we could potentially be threatening their ability to attend in that way, which does, in turn threaten working memory. There is some research about students habituating to certain things. So if you have a poster up in your room and you have it up all year long, do eventually they not notice it anymore because it's been there? And again, if I use that, you're driving down this road that you've driven down so many times, that makes sense. Because after a while, your attention doesn't alert you to certain things in your visual field because they're there. Yet, if there's something new, even if you can't figure out what it is, you are oriented to it. So now, having said that, there's plenty of things in science that we think, yeah, that sounds right, that makes sense, but then it's proven otherwise. So I bring that up to say, I've heard I recently saw something that Dan Willingham said, which was, as far as being a minimalist in the classroom, if you have something that's there the whole time, eventually it won't distract your students anymore. I don't know if that's the case. I think that we need to hear more, that there need to be some more studies about habituation. But why have it there if it's not necessary? Because now you just have, and if there are references that you do want your students to be using, like, I have a complete sentence poster, don't forget your punctuation, don't forget your capital letter. But if that's right next to 3 other posters, now I'm giving them an extra job of scanning, which, burns up valuable capacity. So why? So, we tell our students to focus and to orient to us, but then we're putting all these,
That's so true.
These distracting things, and they can't even help it. And what we're asking them to do is here's some new things that your mind is telling you to look at. But don't do that. But now I want you to inhibit your reflex to look at them. And you might get in trouble if you don't. I mean, it's like we're really setting them up for a real challenge, an unnecessary one.
And that's, and Sarah's walking her talk for folks who are going to watch us later, because her background is blurred, whereas mine has a lot of books and titles. And I think quite distracting. I should probably change that for the next episodes, So I'm actually adding more to your working memory. I apologize. I hope you're listening to us instead of watching us then. But, right? I mean, it makes sense. Yeah.
I'm glad you noticed that because it's interesting. I will see people talking about these concepts, and
Yeah.
in the process, they are totally contradicting. What their slides are distracting or have too many colors or yeah. So, but I have a beautiful office, and so it pains me to blur my background, but I'm like, look, yeah, I'm glad that you noticed that. I have to practice what
Yeah.
I preach. So
So
yes,
I promise that I will blur. I mean, slightly blur. It will still be colorful, but you won't be able to read anything, and that should be enough. I think we want it to look nice after all, right?
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But
And
you
we're
mentioned,
adults, so we have,
yeah,
we aren't as, it's not as tempting for us,
that's
or I
true.
should say, it's hopefully we have stronger inhibitory skills.
We should at least, we
We
should.
should, you know.
But you were talking about Dan Willingham and how when we get habituated to something that has been there forever, we stop paying attention. We don't care so much
Right.
about it. But I was wondering about, what about struggling students who might, so if they're struggling with a problem and then it's really hard, you feel that discomfort, of cognitive overload, right? And then you're looking for something to get distracted. And maybe there's so many details on a poster like that. Maybe you want to revisit them because you don't really want to focus on what the teacher is trying to teach. There are many variables, right? I don't know. Does that ever happen? Because I find myself doing that. I'm trying to get some work done, and it's hard. I'm struggling. And then I start reading the banner that I have in the back that I've read a million times, but then I start reading again just to get off, task or something like that. So, yeah, why is it there in the first place? Right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you are, that's like a demand avoidance. You feel you feel overloaded, and you, all of us would be, forget this. Let me just gaze at that picture when you're really not even, you find yourself not even looking at it.
Yeah.
You're really thinking, your eyes are on it, but you're thinking about something else. Sort of related to that, a different point, but sort of related to that.
Yeah.
When I talk about working memory, sometimes I'll say, when you're having a deep conversation with someone or a thoughtful conversation, do you sometimes find your eyes, looking above them or looking
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And because it is a natural way, it's hard to maintain that eye contact and really, be thinking deeply about, besides having just a casual conversation. If
Yeah.
you're talking about your work, for example, and you're trying to be precise with your word usage and the thoughts that you're sharing, don't you find your eyes kind of wandering around, because it does really quickly offload
Yeah.
that, okay, I'm looking at you, but it's hard for me to also be thinking deeply about this. And I'll share the same analogy when you're driving and you're really looking for something intently. Most of us turn the music down or off
That's
because
true.
we
Yeah.
just need, that becomes interference, and we are really trying to just hone in on finding that location or whatever it is, and the extra stuff is kind of like weighing us down.
Yeah, it's like my wife trying to give me directions when we're lost, and then I have to say, "Hey, let me just
Yeah.
find this place first, and then you can talk to me because I
Right,
can't pay
right,
attention."
right.
Right? Yeah. So interesting. And I was wondering now, Sarah, what about, because we've been talking about working memory. What about the role of a break after instruction? Because one of the things that really kind of bugs me a little bit when I'm thinking about teaching and instruction and class time is that we want to give our students a lot of input. We have to follow the curriculum, right? There's a lot of content to be delivered, but isn't there space for breaks? Are they relevant at all? So we avoid, getting to that point of cognitive overload, and students won't actually learn as much. So should we include breaks in the way we teach, or they're not so relevant?
Well, I think, even as adults, we can start to feel burned out or exhausted. And it's funny, I had a conversation a while back with a linguist who I kind of like tongue in cheek said, how much energy is burned by thinking? Because, I just felt like I was like physically tired, but I hadn't done anything. I was sitting at my desk working. And so I kind of jokingly said, gosh, like, what is the equivalent? Because, and there actually was like a calculation of mental energy used and subsequent, the resulting exhaustion or what you might feel.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to just broadly, separate from working memory or attention, we have to acknowledge that, everyone has a limit, and that our cognitive bandwidth, energy, whatever mental capacity, is not limitless. And eventually, just like the analogy that I gave with the boxes, if you're feeling, poorly, you're just not in a good place to do anything well. And so if we are burning our kids out, and I think your kids, this is your professional decision, their ages, their temperaments, how hard they've been thinking, or has it been relatively easy for them. All of these things go in those on the spot decisions about, we just need a pause. Like, you just need to reset, or this is just too much. And then you find your kids just tuning out. Like you staring at the poster, like I can't anymore. So I, speaking of how that relates to working memory specifically, I actually haven't done much research on that. But I think just my very unscientific response is just, we just need to keep that in mind in general, because, then we start to see, particularly at the younger ages, the behaviors come out, and the fidgetiness and the inattentiveness, and like they've reached their limit. Yeah. They need a break. Yeah. So
that's why, I actually like the idea of using brain breaks in the classroom. Like every couple of minutes, I feel like, okay, this is not working. Let's do something to just take our minds off whatever we were trying to solve. Then we go back to it. And I think that effort of going back to that actually helps as well. It's kind of like retrieving. You're going back to the problem, and you're retrieving, and then that combined with a break works well. The problem is we have so much to teach that it's just insane. And you talk to school managers, they like, how can you make time for breaks? You have to keep teaching, right? But it's not working. The way we're doing is actually detrimental to learning, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can be counterproductive for sure. And I think, what you're talking about with having these little brain breaks is really your own mini version of spacing, which is, revisiting instead of just cramming for information and then assessing, you kind of, and I know you know this, but in case your listeners don't, over time, revisiting the same topic that helps kind of, and then you're pulling it back into working memory. Each time you do that, you are solidifying the knowledge into long-term memory. So, and I think you can be strategic about that. Like sometimes I'll say, for the purpose of working memory, but also for the purpose of just like, okay, you're getting fidgety, you're getting wiggly, you're going to forget. Go do number one and then stop and come back. This way they just have the movement of, because my students are mostly sitting on the carpet when I'm doing whole group instruction, mostly. Or, I think there's ways to be strategic about it without having it to be a formal brain break every time. Like stand up, go touch 3 tables, take a big stretch, and then come sit back down. So where it's a 30-second break versus, you're losing 5 minutes every hour or whatever it is. But I mean, I think you have to definitely keep in mind, I think that teachers do a pretty good job at that, even knowing nothing about, the mechanics of, or the architecture of the minds. They can see when their kids are like, it's time. Particularly, I'll speak for younger students, as I always do. But it is helpful to understand the behind the scenes. And you kind of are looking at things through a diagnostic lens.
Yeah. And well, we're moving towards the end of this episode, and I wanted to focus on what kind of research excites you today? I mean, what is it that is coming out about working memory, something that might actually help us understand this concept better that you've been involved with or looking forward to? Anything new coming?
I wouldn't say that there's new, I mean, there's always new research happening, but I wouldn't say that there's anything new that I'm looking forward to. What's new is the idea that these concepts are being communicated to educators,
Yes.
and that education has started to open the door to be receptive to, okay, maybe this is of value. Um, and so that excites me, and that's the work that I've been trying to do as well. Is how do we broker this information? How do we make it interesting? How do we create? How do we make educators or help them value this information and then want to learn it? And that's really the art of brokering. But I think coming from other teachers, it tends to be much better received, because it's like, hey, look, I have learned about this, and here's how I found it valuable in my classroom. So I'm excited about the fact that the research is starting to make its way closer to practice through people like us who are dedicated to making it more accessible, to making it relevant, to kind of translating some of the science for practitioners. That is what is exciting to me.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. And I think going back to what we said at the beginning, this is not going to replace teachers. You know, it's not going to make teachers useless, obsolete, or anything like that. It's going to empower teachers. You know, it's not. I don't think the science of learning is attempting to create a formula that works, that always works, because it doesn't. There isn't one. You know, like you said, there's so many variables. All students are completely unique, and then different classes, different classrooms, they have different students, and there's no way we can come up with something that works 100% of the time, because it just doesn't work like that, right? Yeah.
Right. I
Good.
mean, the good thing about this particular science is that it does, even though our students are all coming from different backgrounds and, have all kinds of different variables that affect their learning, they all have the same underlying cognitive processes. It's just how well are they functioning? What are they being compromised by? And so the other really compelling thing is, if you understand this, it doesn't matter if you teach music to 18-year-olds or you teach 6-year-olds how to read. It's relevant for you.
Yeah.
And, it just helps you kind of understand your customer and how they
Exactly.
work, and how
Yeah.
to be for them. Yeah.
Yeah, like, when I was talking to Jared Horvath, he said, every human being digests the same way, but,
Mhm.
depending on the input that you need, or the kind of nutrients that you need specifically because of your lifestyle, for example, or maybe you have a condition that's different, right?
Right.
But the
Right.
physiological process is the same, really, and I think that's what we're
Yeah.
getting at. And well, let me geek out a little bit with you now, Sarah, if that's okay, so we can move towards the end, because I found that most people who somehow find their way, like getting into science or something like that, they were major geeks or nerds growing up. But is that your case at all? Do you have any favorite, I don't know, sci-fi novels, films, series, or that was not really part of your life?
Oh, that was 100% part of my life.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as we spoke about earlier, it felt derogatory in nature to me as a preteen teen. So it wasn't something about myself that I advertised, like,
Yeah.
that I was just fascinated by different sciences. I mean, when I was 6, my father took me to a documentary on Stephen Hawking.
Oh,
And that
wow.
just,
Yeah.
I mean, just discovering that, I mean, I was just
Yeah.
hooked, and it just
Yeah.
blew my curiosity out of the water. Do you have?
Let me show you a brief
Yep,
history
there
of
it is.
time. Yeah. See,
Yep,
I'm a major
absolutely.
fan. Yeah.
Yep. So you get it. Yeah. So I think just, I think as geeks, maybe I can speak for some of us, we just craved those mind blowing moments that were
Yeah.
like, what? And then we just have to know more. And that has always been me. Like I said, when I was younger, I felt like it was something I had to hide, unfortunately. And I would hope
Yeah.
that now for girls, or for anybody, but particularly for girls, that that isn't the case, that we feel like we're, strong, intelligent, interested, engaged members of the learning society. But yeah, absolutely. I loved The Matrix.
Me too.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I loved all the kind of movies that you would expect about fascinating things with the mind. So Memento, about the person who had no
Oh,
short-term
yes.
memory, and
Yeah.
Inception. Yeah, I
So
just because
basically, Christopher Nolan there,
I
those.
love a movie that just it keeps me thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. The latest one, the one that really did something to me was Interstellar, by Christopher Nolan. And
Oh my God, I
that
don't know
was
how I didn't
such,
say that.
that's such a beautiful movie. I mean, like in all regards I can think of, it's just
Yeah.
amazing. Such a fascinating story. The science is very well. I'd say they had who was their scientific advisor? I forgot now, but it was an
Oh,
astrophysicist who
was it
actually.
Neil deGrasse?
I think he
Maybe
was
he's
involved a little. Neil deGrasse Tyson was
okay.
involved later, but Kip Thorne, maybe. I think he was the
Okay.
advisor. So they actually ran a simulation on a computer to make the black hole. So that black hole is
Um,
scientifically accurate, and it took a lot of computing power to generate that image for us, and it's phenomenal. So
yeah,
see,
that movie was the
goosebumps
whole
just
package.
thinking about it. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah. I
that's
mean,
how
it had the
geeky I am.
relational aspect, the science, all of it. Yeah, no, that's on the top of my list too. I'm glad you
Ah,
mentioned that.
that's amazing. Well, Sarah, I'm so glad you accepted my invitation. Thank you so much for coming. And I just wanted to end this episode with maybe your final message to, teachers out there who are thinking about the science of learning, or maybe if you want to talk about girls who would like to get into science just like you did. Anything? Any final words?
My advice is always to don't wait for someone to come to you. If you read an article that it moves you, contact the author. If you,
Yeah.
hear about something that interests you, look into it. Take the initiative. And I'm always surprised by the intellectual generosity of people that I think, oh gosh, I put them on such a pedestal, and then they
Yeah.
become your colleague, or they become a friend, or at least they're just willing to they recognize and appreciate your curiosity and are happy to chat with you. So I think you have to, if you have a particular interest, you go for it, you make it happen, get involved with organizations that are sponsoring or involved in whatever aspect of science it is. Yeah, I think you take the initiative, you make it happen for yourself.
That's wonderful. And just before we finish, what are you involved in right now? What is there any place where people can find your work? How do they get in touch with you, Sarah?
I am on Twitter much too often,
Uh,
or I guess it's X now.
X,
Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
X.
I actually prefer Twitter, to be very honest. X.
I think we all
I think
do. We all
most
do.
people do. Yeah.
Yeah. I am S_Oberle. Hopefully
Yeah.
that's not too much for your working memory. I can write it down to
Don't
offload
worry,
it.
I'll link it
Uh,
down here so that will
Okay,
make it easier
okay.
for them.
And
Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn as well. I can't manage many other platforms, so that's pretty much where you'll find me. And I'm going to selfishly plug that I am co-authoring a book right now,
Oh, wow.
which hopefully will be out before this time next year, on executive functions and their
Wow.
role
Amazing.
for our youngest learners, so kindergarten, first, second, third grade, and how teachers can structure the environment and their instruction to sort of as a protective mechanism for students, and and their executive functions, which encompasses working memory and attention and those things that we talked about today. So be on the lookout for that if you work with our youngest students, and we could talk all day, Andre.
We could, I wish, the problem is people's attention span is the problem. Actually, people don't want to watch very long episodes, but we could definitely talk all day. And, I've been inviting a lot of amazing people to this podcast, and I feel like next year I will invite you again so we can talk about other aspects of your work. Yeah. So we'll have other opportunities as well. Definitely. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, everybody. And stay tuned for another episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast coming out soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Congrats, Andre.